I think in order to understand why it's important now, we have to shift back, a few years when we didn't have the number of mediums in which our message was diluted in. Back when, we first got in the business, and it was radio, television, newspaper, and direct mail. It was relatively easy and also extremely important to take advantage of those mediums as a force multiplier to have your brand identity clear and be able to deliver the message that you needed to. And as the mediums evolved and digital's obviously shifted and taken its foothold, what we're seeing is that it's a lot easier for companies to forget their brand identity and focus more on the actual budget of dialing things up to try and increase leads, or dialing budgets down in the times of expense trim. The fact of the matter is it's actually at its peak right now for a company to understand what its brand is and be able to really identify and build out brand guidelines, so that when they map the touch points in the business, which I'll talk back on in a few minutes, that they're able to put a flag in the ground to specifically say what differentiates them from other companies out there in the marketplace, just funneling money into these channels. And the second point that I think is extremely important to note right now is that there's never been a more critical time where trust has been lost regarding sharing identity with businesses. And people are hesitant because of identity theft. People are hesitant to exchange personal information, even if they're getting something back. And what we found is that companies that spend the time to truly have a brand identity and explain the uniqueness of their position in the marketplace have an easier time of transferring trust from the consumer to them as it relates to exchanging information that they can act on, either in the immediate transaction or building a lifetime value out of that customer. So, again, with all of the dilution that's happening with these media channels, it's very easy for companies just to fall back on dialing up budget or dialing back budget, and losing touch with who they really are in the marketplace and who and what the message is that they want to convey to the consumers.
Absolutely. And we're going to touch and go a little bit deeper into those elements that you talked about to give some people some tangible, what I can walk away with and do today that's going to affect my brand. We'll get into that in a little bit. But before we do, Dave, your experience is really in the creative and the positioning.
Sure.
And so can you talk to us about brand experience? Why are we talking about all
Sure.
this now, and why it's important?
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to just add a little bit to what Brian had just mentioned. I think if you look at the past couple of years, one thing that we've all seen is, and this is with our clients, and we've seen it across the country, where we did have some clients who may have pulled back. We're seeing market share get lost. And where we have people that are consistently putting money into their brand, we're seeing them attract market share. So, Subi, I think one of the biggest things is branding's hard. And the reason I say that is because marketers love to be able to quantify and look at ROI. But when you're talking about branding, a lot of times you're talking about top of the funnel, you're talking about awareness. And again, depending on the industry that you're in, you might not, if you're not an impulse type item, you need to make sure that you're still staying relevant and that you are establishing a brand. So, again, I think that one of the biggest things that's hard is when you have these conversations, what's that line where it's the more tactical piece, right? There. So one thing is that all advertising is not branding. There's sometimes you can use the tactical to really hit that low bottom of the funnel to try to get the sale, et cetera. But again, I think if you lose sight of the overarching brand, and that is, as Brian mentioned, what do we stand for? It starts with telling a great story. Storytelling is key. And then from there, it's, are we being consistent? And the one thing that I know we'll touch on that I think is extremely important is it's not always just about ad dollars. It's not about just the external message. It's just as much about internally within a business. Are we part of our own brand? Are we living the brand culture? because there's an expectation that we set, no matter what the budget is, how many ad dollars we're putting into a message, and whatever the mediums are that we're putting it out there, you do need to make sure that your team is actually able to meet those expectations. So, long-winded, but I think it's just such a loaded question, especially in just where we're at right now with what we've seen over the course of the past couple of years, that more than ever, the art of branding is top and front and center right now. It needs to be top of mind.
And Dave, just to add on that, the ease it is to access information for the consumer, and the ease in which it is, particularly at staple products that are easily consumed through channels like Amazon or just online tactics. What we've seen as the product loyalty and brand loyalty has begun to decrease, that the companies that are having success in retaining customers to their brand are the ones who understand that it's not transactional business only at the advertising level, but it's understanding that there is a clear and distinct difference between advertising and marketing. Marketing is that top level umbrella, which in my opinion begins with unique selling propositions. Every single company that's engaged in any business at any level in today's marketplace should have a set of unique selling propositions that they go to market with. And when they go to market with it and the specific tactics in which they choose to go to market at, that's the advertising portion of it. And I think what we have to understand is that when we deploy those marketing tactics into the advertising world, regardless of whether it's that top of the funnel brand awareness consideration advertising, or it's, as Dave said earlier, the bottom of the funnel direct response, we need leads now, we need business now. It's regardless, they are all opportunities that you should look and say, are these touch points in which my brand identity, my unique selling propositions are integrated into that messaging that goes to market? And I think we forget that so often. One, quite honestly, even being in the business every day, eat, sleep, breathe it, it's difficult to track the number of touch points that any given company has in the marketplace. And for everybody on right now, I would highly encourage you to take the chance to do this activity. And what I refer to it as is touch point mapping. Take a few hours, get your team, and take a different perspective to say, what is every touch point that our business engages consumers? And I'm going to expand on that in a second. And do we have brand guidelines in which we can deploy our unique selling propositions and our creative branding to the marketplace? Because when you do that, I'll promise you one thing, it is a force multiplier that will take your share of voice and impact of the deployment of that advertising and increase the return on investment. Indisputably, it will happen. So the other thing that I want to touch on when you're doing the touch point mappings for why creative is so important in today's marketplace is that, and it's a great book, it's a quarter century old or more, but it's called Service, Service, Service. And what they do is they talk about what most of us assume as a consumer, which is the external consumer that we're delivering goods and products to. That essentially we invoice, we collect that revenue, but we often forget that there's another customer on the side, and that's our employees and our culture and our team, as Dave mentioned. And when we have a creative and brand identity that people get behind and go to market with, it helps both with the external customer in driving revenue, but it also helps with recruitment and trust to the internal customer, which is our employees, which is the ability to retain customers, and then dive into what is the lifetime value of a customer and how important it is to have happy customers on the inside, because they get behind creative, they get behind brand identity, and that ultimately delivers the lift to the customers on the outside.